Imagine waking up one day and realizing your entire life was a lie. Your name isn't your real name. Your past was stolen from you. And the family you never knew spent decades searching for you. James Carter was just an ordinary man struggling to raise his daughter and keep his life together. Until one night, he helped an old woman on a rain-soaked street. And that single act of kindness unraveled a mystery that had been buried for over 30 years. What was hidden? Behind that door would change everything. Betrayal, power, a family empire built on secrets, and one man who was never meant to be found. But now he's back. Who stole his past? Why was he taken? And what happens when the truth is finally revealed? Stay with us until the end. Because trust me, this story is one you won't forget. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now, let's begin. A struggling single dad helped an elderly woman only to discover she had a life-changing secret. James Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as he navigated the wet, glistening roads of Portland. Neon signs flickered through the downpour, their reflections stretching across the asphalt like ghostly fingers. Rain pounded against the windshield, blurring the streetlights into soft halos, while the scent of damp pavement and gasoline filled the air. The rhythmic sweep of the wipers barely kept up, leaving streaks of water that distorted the world outside, much like the uncertainty clouding his own mind. Rain drummed against the windshield, the rhythmic patter echoing the turmoil. In his mind, it had been another long, grueling shift, delivering packages across the city, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. But fatigue was the least of his worries. The final notice from his landlord sat crumpled in the passenger seat, a stark reminder that in less than a week, he and Lily would have nowhere to go. His chest tightened, and a wave of helplessness washed over him. He had worked himself to the bone, taken every extra shift, sacrificed sleep, and yet the numbers never added up in his favor. It felt like the world was conspiring against him, pushing him toward an inevitable downfall. He clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to punch the steering wheel. How had his life come to this? A constant battle just to survive. His stomach clenched at the thought. No matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. Glancing at the dashboard clock, he sighed. Nearly midnight. Lily would be asleep by now, curled up under the blanket he had bought from a thrift store last Christmas. The thought of her, innocent and unaware of the battle he was fighting, both comforted and tortured him. As he turned onto a dimly lit street, movement on the sidewalk caught his eye. A figure, small and frail, was struggling to stay upright against the rain. James barely had time to react before the figure collapsed onto the pavement. Shit! He slammed the brakes, tires skidding slightly on the slick road. Without hesitation, he threw open the door and rushed toward the fallen person. It was an elderly woman, her silver hair matted against her forehead, her dress soaked through. Her frail body trembled in the cold, and her pale lips parted slightly, as if struggling to form words. Deep lines etched her face, speaking of years of hardship, yet her cloudy eyes held a flicker of awareness. A quiet plea for help mixed with something unspoken, something almost familiar. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes fluttered open as James knelt beside her. "Mom, can you hear me?" he asked urgently, shaking her lightly. Her gaze met his, soft yet filled with something unspoken. She tried to speak, but only managed. A weak whisper. James didn't hesitate. He scooped her up carefully, surprised at how light she was, and carried her toward his truck. As he held her frail body, a thought flickered through his mind. Why was he always the one to carry the weight of others? Despite his own struggles, his instinct to help never faltered. Perhaps it was the remnants of the man he used to be, before life had chipped away at his hope. Maybe, in helping others, he was trying to hold on to the last pieces of himself that still believed in kindness. As he settled her into the passenger seat, she gripped his hand weakly. "Thank you," she murmured before closing her eyes. James exhaled sharply, glancing at the rain-slicked road ahead. He had no idea who this woman was, but something in his gut told him this was the beginning of something much bigger than himself. James pulled into the long driveway of the old mansion, the tires of his truck crunching over the gravel. The towering Victorian structure loomed ahead, its ornate spires casting jagged shadows against the moonlit sky. Ivy crawled up the weathered stone walls, its tendrils reaching toward cracked windows that reflected the stormy clouds above. The wrought iron gate, slightly ajar, groaned in the wind, adding to the unsettling stillness of the night. A single, flickering lantern illuminated the entrance, its glow barely enough to pierce the suffocating darkness that seemed to cling to the house like a forgotten secret. The house, a towering Victorian structure, stood in eerie solitude against the night sky, its darkened windows staring down at him like watchful eyes. He killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around him as he turned to look at the frail woman beside him. "Are you sure you're all right, ma'am?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. She managed a weak smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt, her knuckles pale against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. A faint sigh escaped her lips, as if the weight of years pressed against her chest, threatening to spill unspoken words. She lingered for a moment, gripping the edge of her coat as if anchoring herself to the present, before finally turning toward James with an expression that carried both gratitude and something deeper, something guarded, as though she was debating whether to let him see beyond the surface. "I'll be fine, dear. You've done enough, more than enough." James wasn't so sure. She had barely spoken on the drive over, and even now there was something distant in her gaze, something unreadable. He stepped out and hurried to her side, shielding her with his jacket as he guided her up the rain-slicked steps. The front door creaked open at the touch of her hand, revealing an interior that was both grand and strangely hollow. Chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting dim pools of light over worn furniture draped in dust covers. James hesitated. He had asked the question instinctively, but as soon as the words left his mouth, they hung heavy in the air. He knew what it was like to have no one to call, no one waiting at home with open arms. The same silence that filled his own nights seemed to echo in the empty spaces of this house. "Is there someone I should call for you? Family? A friend?" Rose paused in the doorway, a shadow flickering over her face before she shook her head. "No one. It's just me now." A strange pang of sympathy settled in his chest. He knew what loneliness felt like. He had been living with it for years. "At least let me make you some tea before I go," he offered, unsure why he felt so compelled to stay. Rose's smile deepened, a twinkle of something almost knowing in her eyes. "I'd like that." As he followed her into the dimly lit house, James couldn't shake the feeling that stepping inside had somehow changed the course of his life. And then his gaze landed on the locked door at the end of the hallway. A faint draft seemed to seep from underneath it, carrying with it a whisper of something stale, something long forgotten. His breath caught as a cold shiver traced its way down his spine. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard a soft creak, as if something inside had shifted. The dim hallway lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the wooden frame. His pulse quickened. He didn't know why, but every instinct in him told him that whatever lay beyond that door was not meant to be disturbed. Something about it made his stomach tighten. Something told him this house held more secrets than he could possibly imagine. James woke to the faint glow of morning light filtering through the thin curtains of his small apartment. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but he barely registered it as he stared at the worn eviction notice on the kitchen table. The previous night felt like a fever dream. The old woman, the eerie mansion, the locked door that sent an unshakable chill down his spine. He rubbed his face and exhaled deeply. He had no time for mysteries. He had to figure out how to keep a roof over Lily's head, but for some reason he couldn't stop thinking about Rose Lancaster. By mid-morning, James found himself driving back to the mansion. He told himself it was just to check on her, to make sure she was all right after last night. But deep down, he knew something about the place, about her, had drawn him in. The mansion looked different in daylight, though still imposing. The ivy-covered walls, the stained glass windows, the faint scent of old books and lavender that lingered in the air. He knocked on the heavy oak door, and within seconds it creaked open to reveal Rose, now looking more put together, her frailty concealed beneath a poised expression. "James," she greeted, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "I was hoping you'd return." Over breakfast, in the sunroom, an elegant space lined with shelves of books and dusty trinkets, Rose studied him carefully. Finally, she set down her teacup and spoke. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "I need a driver, someone I can rely on." James frowned. "A driver? And a personal assistant," she added. "I don't get around as easily as I used to. I could use someone trustworthy." James hesitated. It was an odd offer. He had spent his life hauling packages, not escorting elderly women around, but the thought of steady pay, especially now, was tempting. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I have a daughter to look after." Rose nodded, unfazed. "Flexible. Hours, fair pay, and a room here should you ever need it." James blinked. "A room? In case you and Lily require a more stable situation." Her eyes, sharp despite her age, held something unreadable. James stiffened. "Why would you offer that to someone you barely know?" Rose leaned back. In her chair, her expression calm but enigmatic. "Because sometimes, James, fate brings people together for a reason." Something in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. James glanced around the sunroom, his gaze landing on an old, ornate picture frame sitting on the mantel. He stood, drawn toward it by an inexplicable pull. The black and white photograph inside depicted a young boy, no older than 5, standing beside a woman whose features bore a striking resemblance to Rose. His stomach twisted. The boy looked eerily familiar. He turned back to Rose, but she only sipped her tea, watching him in silence. James swallowed hard. Something about this place, about her, wasn't just strange, it was personal. James couldn't shake the unease that settled in his chest as he drove back home that afternoon. Rose Lancaster's words echoed in his mind, because sometimes, James, fate brings people together for a reason. It wasn't just the job offer. That unsettled him. It was the way she had looked at him, as if she knew something he didn't. And then there was the photograph, the young boy who looked eerily familiar. That night, as he lay in bed, he turned the events over in his head, restless. Lily stirred in the next room, her soft breathing a reminder of why he had to take this job. Money was running out, and this opportunity, strange as it was his best option. The next morning, James returned to Rose's mansion, determined to keep his focus on work and not whatever odd feeling he had about the house. Rose greeted him with a warm smile, handing him a list of errands. "Before we begin," she said, "there's something I want to show you." She led him down the hallway, her steps slow but purposeful. James's eyes drifted to the locked door at the end of the corridor. He was certain he had heard something behind it the night before, a whisper, a shuffle, maybe just the creaking of old wood in the wind. But as they passed, Rose didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she stopped before a different door and pushed it open. Inside was a study, the walls lined with shelves stacked high with books, At the center, a large wooden desk sat beneath the golden glow of a vintage lamp. Rose gestured toward a chair. "Sit," she said. James hesitated but complied, watching as she unlocked a drawer and pulled out a box. She placed it between them. "This," she said, "is my past." Curiosity gripped him as she lifted the lid, revealing old letters, photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings. One headline caught his attention: "Local heir's son missing. Decades-long search continues." James picked up the article, his pulse hammering. "What is this?" Rose's expression was unreadable. "My son was taken from me many years ago. I never found him." A chill ran through James. He scanned the article, his breath catching at the sketch of the missing child. The face was eerily familiar because it looked like a younger version of himself. James's throat went dry. This can't be." Rose met his gaze with quiet intensity. "I don't know for sure," she admitted, "but the resemblance, it's too strong to ignore." James's mind raced. He had never known his birth parents. He had been raised in foster care, his past a blank slate. Could it be possible? Before he could respond, a faint noise echoed from the hallway. James stiffened. The locked door. Rose sighed, her gaze flickering toward it. "There are things in this house I have yet to explain," she said, her voice heavy with meaning. "But for now, let's take this one step at a time." James barely heard her. He was staring at the article in his hands, feeling the world shift beneath his feet. Was it possible that he had just found the mother he never knew he had? James sat in stunned silence, his fingers gripping the fragile newspaper clipping like it held the key to everything he never knew about himself. His heart pounded in his chest. The article, the missing boy, the resemblance. He wanted to deny it, to brush it off as a coincidence. But deep down, something in him stirred. Rose sat across from him, watching him carefully, her frail hands folded in her lap. "I don't expect you to believe it right away," she said softly. "But James, I have spent decades searching, hoping. When I saw you that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years." James swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "This doesn't make sense. I don't remember anything from before the foster system. I don't even know if—" He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "If I want to know." Rose nodded, as if she had expected his reluctance. "I understand. But if you're willing, we can find out the truth. Together." James exhaled, rubbing his temple. It was too much. Too fast. He needed air. I need some time," he muttered, standing up. He turned toward the door, but a sound stopped him in his tracks, a whisper. Faint, almost indistinguishable, but enough to send a shiver down his spine. He turned sharply, eyes darting toward the locked door at the end of the hall. The feeling from the previous nights returned, creeping into his bones. "What's behind that door?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Rose's face darkened, the warmth in her eyes replaced by something unreadable. "It's better if you don't concern yourself with that," she said simply. James wasn't satisfied with that answer. "It's not just an old door, is it? There's something you don't want me to know." Rose sighed. "Some secrets need to stay buried, James. This house, it holds more than memories." James clenched his jaw. He had spent his entire life not knowing where he came from, and now, standing in a house that might belong to his past, he wasn't going to let another mystery stay hidden. "I think I deserve to know the truth," he said firmly. Rose studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then there are things I must tell you," she said quietly. "But not here. Meet me in the library after dinner. No interruptions." James nodded, though the unease didn't leave him. As he turned toward the exit, he glanced back at the locked door, its heavy wood and iron handle seeming to taunt him. Whatever secrets lay beyond it, James knew one thing for certain. The past was about to reveal itself, whether he was ready or not. The fire crackled softly in the dimly lit library, casting flickering shadows across the towering bookshelves. James stood just inside the doorway, his muscles taut with apprehension. The scent of aged paper and burning wood filled the air, but it did nothing to calm his nerves. Rose sat in the grand armchair by the fireplace, a glass of brandy in her frail hand. She motioned for James to sit across from her, and after a brief hesitation, he complied. The weight of unspoken words settled between them like an uninvited guest. "James," Rose finally began, her voice steady but low, "I know you have questions, and I owe you answers." She took a slow sip of her drink before setting it aside. "But I must warn you, some truths are harder to face than not knowing at all." James clenched his jaw. "I've lived my entire life not knowing who I am. If you have something to tell me, now is the time." Rose studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, let me start at the beginning." She leaned back, her gaze lost in the flames as she recounted the past. "I was once married to a man named Henry Lancaster. We were well off, influential, and we had a son, our only child." James's breath hitched. "His name was Jacob," she continued, her eyes shimmering with sorrow. "He was taken from us when he was just a toddler. One moment he was playing in the garden, the next he was gone. We searched for years. We followed every lead, every whisper. But nothing." James swallowed hard. "And you think I'm him?" Rose nodded. "I don't think, James. I know." His head swam. It was too much to process. "But how can you be sure?" he demanded. "There must be a mistake." Rose reached for a small wooden box on the side table. She opened it carefully and took out an old silver locket. She handed it to James. His fingers trembled as he flipped it open. Inside was a faded picture of a boy with light brown eyes and a tuft of dark hair. His heart pounded. He knew that face, not because he remembered it, but because it was the same face that stared back at him in the mirror every day. "You were too young to remember," Rose said gently, "but I have never forgotten you." James could hardly breathe. Everything he thought he knew about his life felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He set the locket down carefully. "If I'm your son," he whispered, "who took me?" "Why?" Rose hesitated. "That," she said, "I do not know. But I do know this. Someone in this house may have the answers." James's gaze snapped up. "Who?" Rose took a deep breath. "The person behind the locked door." A cold chill ran down James's spine. He had suspected there was more to that room than Rose had let on, but he never imagined it could hold the key to his past. "Are you saying someone is in there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rose nodded. "Yes, and it's time you met them." The fire crackled louder, filling the silence between them as James tried to steady his racing heart. Tomorrow he would uncover the truth, one way or another. James barely slept that night. The weight of Rose's revelation sat heavy on his chest, an anchor dragging him into the depths of confusion and unease. His entire life had been built on a foundation of uncertainty. But now, there was a chance to uncover the truth. And it terrified him as much as it intrigued him. As the first rays of morning light filtered through the mansion's grand windows, he found himself standing in front of the locked door. The air around it felt heavy, almost electric, as if the secrets behind it were pushing against the wood, desperate to be freed. Rose approached slowly, a single brass key in her frail hand. Her gaze met his, filled with something between anticipation and sorrow. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. James swallowed hard and nodded. With a slow, deliberate movement, Rose inserted the key into the lock and turned it. A sharp click echoed through the hall, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. James stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. The room was smaller than he expected, lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound tomes, old documents, and yellowed photographs. A large wooden desk stood in the center, its surface cluttered with papers and artifacts from a forgotten time. And then he saw him. In the far corner, seated in a worn armchair, was a man. His hair, once dark, was now streaked with silver. His sharp blue eyes flickered toward James, and a moment of silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. James felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. He didn't know what he had expected, but it wasn't this. Rose stepped forward. "James," she said quietly, "this is Henry Lancaster." James's mind reeled. "Your husband?" he asked, voice hoarse. Rose nodded. "And your father?" The words crashed over him like a tidal wave, pulling him under. He stared at the man before him, searching for familiarity, for anything that might connect them beyond words. Henry remained silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, the old man spoke. "I always knew you'd come back," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I just didn't know when." James felt the room spin. His whole life he'd been searching for something nameless, something that had always felt just out of reach. And now, standing in this hidden room, face to face with the man who had once lost him, he realized the truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "What happened to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry exhaled, slowly. "Sit down, son. There's a lot to tell." James hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, ready, finally, to hear the truth. James sat stiffly in the chair across from Henry Lancaster, his pulse hammering as he tried to make sense of the moment. His father, the man he never knew, sat mere feet away, his weathered hands clasped together, eyes shadowed with something James couldn't yet define. Guilt, pain, or something else entirely. Rose hovered nearby, her hands gently folded in front of her as if she, too, was holding her breath. Finally, Henry exhaled, his gaze locking onto James's. "I owe you the truth," he said. His voice was deep but rough, as though it had gone unused for years. "Everything you thought you knew about your past, about yourself, it's time to set it right." James's hands curled into fists on his lap. "Then start talking." Henry nodded. 35 years ago, you were taken from us, not by chance, not by accident, but because someone wanted you gone." James flinched. His stomach churned as he processed the words. "Taken," he echoed. "Who? Why?" Henry ran a tired hand over his face. "The Lancaster family was powerful, too powerful. We had enemies, people, who saw our influence as a threat. They wanted leverage, and what better way to hurt a man than to take his only son?" James felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "You're saying I was kidnapped, as some kind of power play?" Rose sat down beside Henry, her face pale. "We searched for years, James," she murmured. "We exhausted every lead, every clue, but you had vanished without a trace. It was as if the world had swallowed you whole." James's mind reeled. He had grown up believing he was abandoned, unwanted. Now this new reality painted a different story, one filled with betrayal and manipulation. Henry continued, his voice thick with regret. "By the time we had any solid information, it was too late. Whoever took you had hidden you so deeply that even our best efforts couldn't bring you home." James swallowed hard. "So what happened? How did I end up in foster care?" Henry's expression darkened. "The people who took you, They didn't keep you. You were too high profile, too risky. So they let you slip through the cracks, making sure you'd never find your way back to us. You were left at an orphanage under a different name. No connection to the Lancasters. No past. James pressed his fingers to his temples, his thoughts a tangled mess. He had spent years wondering who he was, where he came from. And now the truth was here, raw and unforgiving. I lost everything, he whispered. Rose reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. But now, you've found your way back. Henry leaned forward, his gaze intense. James, I know this is a lot, but you deserve to know everything. There's more than just who you are, more than just a missing past. James's heart pounded. What else? Henry hesitated before speaking the words that would change everything once again. You're not just a Lancaster. You're the rightful heir to everything we built. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, as James realized that this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of something much bigger. James sat frozen, the weight of Henry's words settling over him like an iron shroud. The rightful heir? The idea seemed ridiculous, almost laughable. He had spent his entire life struggling, scraping by, fighting to provide for Lily. The thought that he belonged to something as grand and powerful as the Lancaster name felt alien, like trying to wear a stranger's skin. Rose broke the silence first, her voice softer now, tinged with something almost pleading. James, I know this is a lot to take in, but you must understand, this is your birthright. James let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. A birthright? He scoffed. I grew up bouncing between foster homes. No one came looking for me. No one even knew who I was. He looked at Henry, his eyes dark with emotion. And, now you're telling me I was meant to inherit some legacy? Henry leaned forward, his once powerful frame now slightly hunched with age, but his piercing blue eyes held firm. You weren't just meant to, James. It was stolen from you. You were stolen from us. The fire crackled behind them, filling the silence between each weighted word. James clenched his fists. He wanted to believe them, but how could he? His entire life had been built on scraps, scraps of work, scraps of hope. No one had ever handed him anything. Rose reached into the same wooden box from before, pulling out another document, this time an old, worn birth certificate. She held it out to James. With hesitant fingers, he took it. His eyes scanned the faded ink, and his breath hitched. Jacob Henry Lancaster. Born August 12th, 1985. His hands trembled. This, he swallowed hard. This is me? Henry nodded. The name may have changed, but you are my son. James rubbed his temple. His head was spinning. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Yet, the evidence was there, the resemblance, the documents, the locket, the gut feeling that had gnawed at him since he first saw Rose. I don't know if I can do this, James admitted, his voice raw. I've spent my whole life trying to survive, trying to be a father to Lily. I don't know how to be this. Henry's gaze softened. I won't pretend it will be easy, son. But you are not alone in this. He gestured toward Rose, then toward the mansion around them. This house, this family, it's yours, and so is the truth. James exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. And what happens if I walk away? Rose flinched slightly, but Henry remained steady. That's your choice, he said, simply. But if you walk away, the people who took you, the ones who wanted you gone, they win. They buried you, James, and we may never find out why. A slow, cold dread curled in James's stomach. You think they're still out there? Henry's jaw tightened. I know they are. The fire crackled again, the only sound. In the vast library, as James stared at his father, at the man who had been waiting decades for his return. And for the first time, James realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. James sat in the dimly lit library, staring at the birth certificate still clutched in his trembling hands. The name, Jacob Henry Lancaster, seemed foreign and unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. His mind swirled with questions, doubts, and an ache he couldn't quite name. Across from him, Henry and Rose waited, their expressions unreadable. The flickering firelight cast long shadows along the bookshelves, making the room feel even more enclosed. "You expect me to just accept this?" James finally said, his voice rough. "That I belong here? That I'm this heir to a family I never knew?" Henry exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't expect anything from you, James, but the truth is the truth, whether you're ready for it or not." James let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "The truth. The truth is I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't wanted, why I was left behind, and now you're telling me I was stolen, that someone wanted me gone." Rose flinched at the edge in his tone, but Henry remained still. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And if we don't find out who did it, they could still be watching, waiting." James stiffened. "You think they still care? It's been decades." Henry's jaw tightened. "Whoever took you had power, and people like that don't just disappear. They hide in plain sight." A cold shiver ran down James's spine. His entire life, he had worked, struggled, fought to create stability for Lily, and now it seemed the ground beneath him had never been stable at all. Rose cleared her throat softly. "James, there's more." He lifted his gaze, wary. "More?" She stood slowly and moved toward the bookshelf behind her. With a careful hand, she pulled free a leather-bound journal. Its edges were worn, the cover faded from years of handling. She handed it to James. "This belonged to your mother," she said quietly. James hesitated before taking it. His fingers traced the embossed initials on the cover. "E.L. Elizabeth Lancaster," Rose murmured. She wrote everything down, every clue, every lead, every bit of hope that one day she would find you. James swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. He slowly opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with delicate handwriting. Names were underlined, addresses scrawled in the margins. And then he stopped. A single word stood out in the middle of a page, circled over and over in dark ink. "Calverton." He looked up. "What is this?" Rose's expression darkened. "It was the last place your mother was investigating before she passed." James's breath caught. "Passed?" Henry nodded, grief flickering in his gaze. "Your mother never stopped searching for you, James. She died still believing she would find you. But Calverton—" He hesitated. "She was convinced that's where the truth was buried." James tightened his grip on the journal. He didn't know what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. He wasn't done searching. The past was calling, and this time he was going to answer. James sat in silence, the weight of his mother's journal heavy in his hands. The name Calverton loomed in his mind like a distant storm, a place that held the answers he had been unknowingly searching for his entire life. He could feel it, the pull of the past, the gravity of truths buried for decades. Henry and Rose watched him, their gazes filled with unspoken expectations. Finally, James exhaled sharply and stood. "I need to go there, to Calverton." Henry nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might. But James, you can't do this alone." James stiffened. "I've done everything alone my whole life." Rose reached out, her frail fingers brushing against his arm. "You don't have to anymore." The sincerity in her voice made something crack inside him, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He turned his attention to Henry. "Do you know anyone in Calverton?" Henry sighed, running a hand through his silvered hair. "There's one man. Elias Vance. He was a private investigator working for your mother before she passed. If anyone still has information, it's him." James nodded. "Then that's where I start." The drive to Calverton was long. the roads winding through stretches of dense forest. The further he drove, the more the outside world seemed to fade into something older, untouched. The town itself was small, almost forgotten, with narrow streets and buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. James parked outside a dusty diner, its neon sign flickering intermittently. The air smelled of damp earth and coffee. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. A few heads turned his way, curiosity flickering in their eyes before they returned to their meals. James scanned the room until his gaze landed on an older man sitting in a corner booth, Elias Vance. Vance was in his 60s, his once dark hair streaked with grey. His sharp blue eyes studied James carefully as he approached. "You must be Lancaster's boy," he said gruffly, taking a sip of his coffee. James slid into the booth across from him. "James Carter," he corrected. "At least that's who I thought I was." Vance nodded knowingly. "Your mother?" "She never stopped. Looking for you. She came to me years ago, convinced that Calverton held the truth, but she was getting too close to something people didn't want uncovered." James's stomach tightened. "And what exactly was she looking for?" Vance leaned in, lowering his voice. "The people who took you, they weren't just trying to hurt your family. They were covering up something much bigger, something tied to the Lancasters in this town." James frowned. "What do you mean?" Vance glanced around before pulling a worn folder from his coat. He slid it across the table. "Your mother was onto something before she died. This might help you pick up where she left off." James hesitated before opening it. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and pages filled with cryptic notes. One name appeared over and over: Harrison Blythe. James looked up. "Who is Harrison Blythe?" Vance's expression darkened. "The man who might know exactly why you were taken, and the one person in this town who never wanted you to be found." A chill ran down James's spine. The past wasn't just calling, it was closing in. James stared at the name written across the documents. Harrison Blythe. The weight of it settled in his chest like a stone, pressing against his ribs. The man who might have all the answers. The man who, according to Elias Vance, never wanted James to be found. He looked up at Vance. "Where do I find him?" The old investigator sighed, tapping his fingers against the worn tabletop. "That's the tricky part," he said. "Blythe isn't the kind of man you just knock on the door of. He's powerful, protected, and if your mother was right, he's dangerous." James clenched his jaw. "I didn't come all this way to back down. I need to know what happened." Vance studied him, then nodded. "He owns a law firm here in town, Blythe and Associates. But that's just the public face. His real dealings happen elsewhere. You're not going to get in through the front door." James leaned forward. "Then how do I get to him?" Vance smirked slightly. "You get his attention. And lucky for you, he's a man who values his reputation. If you start digging around in places you shouldn't, he'll come to you." James exhaled sharply. He hated the idea of poking a sleeping bear. But if that's what it took to wake it, up so be it. That night, James drove to the heart of Calverton, past the quiet neighborhoods, and into the part of town where the buildings loomed taller, the streets colder. Blythe and Associates stood like a monument of wealth and control, its glass windows reflecting the dim streetlights. He parked a block away, heart pounding in his chest as he stepped out of the car. He wasn't here to walk through the front doors. He was here to look where no one else wanted to. Vance had given him a starting point, a small bar on the outskirts of town where Blythe's lower-level associates gathered. If there was dirt on the man, this was where he'd find it. The place was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and smoke. James walked in, keeping his shoulders relaxed, his movements careful. He spotted a group of men at a corner. Booth, laughing, drinking, talking in hushed tones. He approached the bar, ordering a drink, but keeping his ears open. Then he heard it. Blythe's on edge lately. Said something about loose ends that need tying up. James's grip tightened on his glass. You think it's about that Lancaster thing? Another man asked. The first man scoffed. Who the hell knows? That old story. Again? That kid vanished decades ago. James swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay still. He knew, in that moment, that he was closer than ever. Blythe was still covering something up. And now, he knew James was back. He didn't need to find. Blythe would find him. James left the bar, his mind racing with what he had just overheard. Blythe knew. He knew James had resurfaced, knew that the past was clawing its way back to the present. And if Blythe was the kind of man Vance described, James had no doubt that he was already being watched. He pulled his jacket tighter around him as he stepped onto the cold, empty street. The air was thick with tension, every shadow stretching a little too far, every footstep echoing a little too loudly. He forced himself to walk at an even pace, to not glance over his shoulder, but he could feel it. Eyes on him, the weight of unseen surveillance pressing against his back. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Vance James answered without hesitation. Talk. You stirred up the hornet's nest, Vance said, his voice low. Blythe's people know you're looking. That means you don't have much time before they come to shut you up. James exhaled sharply. Good. Let them come, Vance cursed, under his breath. This isn't some bar fight, kid. Blythe doesn't do warnings. If he sees you as a threat, you won't get a second chance. James clenched his jaw. Then I need to hit first. The night deepened as James made his way back to his motel, his mind whirring. He knew Blythe would send someone, and he wasn't about to be caught off guard. He checked the locks on the door twice, then positioned a chair beneath the knob. If someone tried to break in, he'd be ready. He placed his mother's journal on the small desk beside the bed, flipping through the pages again. Calverton, the Lancaster name, the missing child. Every thread led back to Blythe, and yet there were still too many unanswered questions. A noise outside the window made him freeze. James slowly reached for the knife he kept tucked in his bag. The tension in the air was suffocating. He moved toward the window, keeping to the shadows, his pulse hammering in his ears. A dark figure stood across the parking lot, half shrouded in the dim glow of a streetlight, not moving, just watching. James felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He had spent his entire life surviving, but this was different. This wasn't about running anymore. It was about standing his ground. His grip tightened around the knife handle. He had no intention of waiting to see what happened next. With a steady breath, James opened the door and stepped into the night. It was time to stop being the hunted. James took slow, deliberate steps toward the figure standing under the streetlight. His grip on the knife tightened, but he kept it low, hidden in the shadows of his coat. He had spent too many years on the defensive. Now it was time to take control. The figure didn't move as James approached, but he could sense the tension in the air, the unspoken threat. As he got closer, the light revealed a tall man with sharp, calculating eyes and a smirk that barely concealed his amusement. "You're making a lot of noise, Lancaster," the man said smoothly. "Blythe doesn't appreciate people digging into things they shouldn't." James halted a few feet away, his pulse steady but alert. "Then maybe Blythe should answer for the things he's done." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not how this works. You should take what's left of your past and walk away. Otherwise you won't like what happens next." James exhaled slowly. "I've spent my entire life walking away. That ends tonight." The smirk faded. "Then you leave me no choice." The man moved fast, too fast for someone his size. James barely had time to react before a fist aimed for his ribs. He twisted, dodging just enough to take a glancing blow instead of a full hit. The pain lanced through his side, but he didn't hesitate. He drove his knee upward, catching his attacker off guard and sending him stumbling backward. James pressed forward, slamming his forearm into the man's throat, pinning him against the brick wall of the alley. "Tell Blythe he's out of time. I'm coming for him," the man wheezed, eyes narrowing as he struggled against James's hold. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped. "You think you're the hunter now?" James held his gaze, his grip, unwavering. "I know I am." A sudden clicking sound made James freeze. He barely had time to move before the glint of a knife flashed in the dim light. He twisted just in time, the blade slicing the sleeve of his jacket instead of his skin. With a swift counter, James slammed his own knife into the attacker's hand, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. Before the man could recover, James landed a punch to his jaw, knocking him out cold. Breathing heavily, James stepped back, shaking out the pain in his knuckles. He knew this was just the beginning. Blythe wasn't going to send just one man. The real fight was still ahead. James retrieved the fallen knife and turned toward the motel, his mind already racing with what came next. Tomorrow he would face Blythe himself. James stood outside the grand iron gates of Blythe and Associates, his fists clenched at his sides. The morning sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the pavement. His body ached from the fight the night before, but his resolve had never been stronger. It was time to end this. He pushed open the gates and strode forward, ignoring the security cameras that followed his every move. If Blythe knew he was coming, all the better. James wasn't here to hide. He was here to demand the truth. The receptionist barely had time to react before James walked past her, heading straight for the elevator. "Sir, you can't—" "Watch me," he growled, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator doors closed, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. Everything had led to this moment. His mother's journal, the years of unanswered questions, the lies and betrayals. Blythe had been behind it all. When the doors slid open, James stepped into a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind a massive desk sat Harrison Blythe, calm and composed, as if he'd been expecting him all along. "James Carter," Blythe said smoothly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Or should I say, Jacob Lancaster?" James remained standing. "Cut the games, you know why I'm here," Blythe sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I suppose I do, but tell me, what exactly do you think you'll accomplish by coming here?" James stepped closer, his voice like steel. "I want the truth. No more secrets, no more half-answers. What really happened to me? Why was I taken?" Blythe studied him for a moment before standing. "Very well," he said. "You deserve that much." He walked over to a cabinet, unlocking it with a small key. Inside were stacks of files, old newspaper clippings, and documents that had clearly been kept hidden for years. Blythe pulled out a single folder and placed it on the desk. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said. "But be warned, sometimes the truth is worse than the lie." James snatched the folder and flipped it open. Inside were police reports, witness statements, even hospital records. His breath caught when he saw his own face in an old photograph, labeled Missing Child Case Number 1989. His fingers trembled as he read the official report. The abduction was orchestrated to remove Jacob Lancaster from the Lancaster estate, ensuring no rightful heir remained. Orders came from inside the family. James's vision blurred as he processed the words. "Inside the family?" Blythe nodded. "Your own blood betrayed you. Your uncle, desperate to take control of the Lancaster fortune, had you removed. Your parents never stopped searching for you, but by the time they got close, it was too late." James swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "My uncle did this, and you helped cover it up?" Blythe met his gaze without flinching. "I did what I was paid to do, but your mother, she was relentless. She got too close, so she had to be silenced." A red haze clouded James's vision. "You had her killed," Blythe sighed. "It wasn't personal, it was business." James lunged across the desk, grabbing Blythe by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "It was my mother," he roared. "You stole my life. You took everything from me." Blythe struggled, but there was no fear in his eyes, only cold acceptance. "And yet here you are, the true heir. What will you do now, James? Kill me?" James's fists shook. Every fibre of his being screamed for vengeance. But then he thought of Lily, of the life he was trying to build, of the promise he had made to himself, to be better than the ghosts of his past. Slowly he let go, shoving Blythe back. "No," he said, his voice raw. "You're not worth it." He picked up the folder and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Blythe called out, "This isn't over, Lancaster." James paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You're right," he said. "It's just over for you." James stepped outside, feeling the crisp morning air on his face. The weight he had carried for years felt lighter now, though not gone. Some wounds never fully heal, but he had taken back his own story. He drove back to the Lancaster estate, where Henry and Rose were waiting. As he walked through the grand entrance, Henry stood, his eyes searching James's face. "Did you get what you came for?" Henry asked. James set the folder on the table. "I got the truth. And now, it's time to rebuild." Rose stepped forward, her wrinkled hands grasping his. "Your mother would be so proud of you." James felt his throat tighten. "I hope so." He turned, looking toward the stairs that led to the upper levels of the house. The Lancaster legacy was his now, not just in name, but in choice. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace it. Weeks later, James stood on the balcony of the Lancaster estate, watching as Lily played in the garden below. Her laughter filled the air, a sound so pure it cut through all the darkness of the past. He had spent years searching for where he belonged, and now he knew this was home. As he turned to step inside, he caught his reflection in the glass door. Not just James Carter, the man who had fought for survival. Not just Jacob Lancaster, the heir to a shattered dynasty, but a man who had finally found his place in the world, and this time no one was taking it away. And that is the end of James Carter's incredible journey, a story of mystery, betrayal, and redemption. But now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in James's position? Would you have walked away, or would you have sought revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, where are you watching from? Let's see how far our community stretches. Tell me your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you love mystery, thriller, and real-life storytelling, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this journey. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep exploring the unknown.